High Admiral Kethvorin stood at the center of his command bridge and watched the stars spin slowly beyond the massive viewport of his flagship, the VSS Conqueror's Pride, and he felt nothing but absolute confidence in his own power and the power of his people. The Volanthi Dominion had ruled these stars for 4,000 years, and in all that time, they had never lost a single naval battle, never retreated from any enemy, never shown weakness to any species foolish enough to challenge them. His scales, a deep purple that marked him as nobility among his kind, gleamed under the blue lights of the bridge as he turned to face his communications officer, a younger Volanthi named Sethris, who had served under him for only 3 cycles. "Report," Kethvorin commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority that came from decades of conquest and victory. "Aye, Admiral," Sethris replied with a bow of his crested head. "Our sensor stations near the Ember Nebula have detected an unknown vessel entering Sovereign Dominion space without authorization, and preliminary scans indicate it belongs to a species called humans." Kethvorin's thin lips curled into something between amusement and contempt, for he had heard whispers of these humans before, scattered reports from distant trading posts and minor diplomatic channels that spoke of a young species from an unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy. "Humans," he repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. "I have heard of them, a primitive species that only recently discovered faster than light travel. Yes?" "That is correct, High Admiral. According to our records, they achieved interstellar capability only 200 years ago, which makes them infants compared to the great civilizations of the galaxy." The Admiral laughed, and several of his bridge officers joined him, their scaled faces showing the same dismissive contempt that their commander felt. "And these infants dare to enter our space without permission," Kethvorin said, walking slowly toward the tactical display that dominated the center of the bridge. "Do they not know who we are? Do they not understand what happens to those who disrespect the Dominion?" An older officer, Commander Velith, stepped forward with a data tablet in his clawed hands, and his expression showed a hint of caution that was unusual for a Volanthi warrior. "High Admiral, I must inform you that the Galactic Registry contains very little information about humanity, and what information exists is strangely incomplete, as if large portions have been deliberately hidden or never recorded." Kethvorin waved a dismissive hand, his contempt growing rather than diminishing at this news. "Hidden information means nothing, Velith. It simply means they are too primitive to have accomplished anything worth recording, or too embarrassed by their weakness to share their history with the galaxy. Perhaps, High Admiral, but the archivists have flagged this species for further study, and they recommend caution until we understand more about their capabilities." The Admiral's eyes narrowed, and his tail twitched with irritation behind him, for he did not appreciate being told to show caution by scholars who had never commanded a warship or faced an enemy in battle. "The archivists sit in their libraries and worry about shadows," Kethvorin snapped. "I have commanded the Dominion's fleets for 40 years. And I have crushed species far more impressive than a handful of primitive apes from an insignificant world. So tell me, Velith, how many ships does this human vessel have with it?" Commander Velith checked his tablet, and his crest lowered slightly in what might have been confusion or concern. "That is another strange detail, High Admiral. There appears to be only one ship, a single vessel sitting motionless near the edge of the nebula." "One ship," Kethvorin repeated, and now his laughter was genuine and loud, echoing across the bridge and causing his officers to smile nervously. "They send one ship into our territory. These humans are either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and I suspect the latter." He turned to his tactical officer, a scarred veteran named Karth, who'd served in more battles than anyone else on the bridge. "Karth, assemble a battle group. 15 cruisers should be more than enough to deal with one trespassing vessel and teach these humans The cost of disrespecting the Volanthi Dominion. At once, High Admiral, Karth replied with a sharp salute. Shall I instruct the captains to attempt communication before engaging? Catthorne considered this for a moment, tapping one claw against his command chair as he thought about the proper way to handle this situation. Yes, give them one chance to surrender and beg for mercy, and if they refuse, destroy them completely. Leave nothing but debris to mark their foolishness. As his officers rushed to carry out his commands, Catthorne allowed himself to feel a moment of satisfaction, for this would be an easy victory. A simple demonstration of Volanthi superiority that would remind the galaxy why his people ruled these stars. In the navigation section of the bridge, a young officer named Therese worked at her console with growing unease, for she had been running calculations on the human vessel since it was first detected, and something about the readings did not make sense. Commander Veleth, she called out softly, not wanting to attract the Admiral's attention. Could you look at these sensor readings? Because I think something might be wrong with our equipment. Veleth walked over to his station and leaned down to examine the data she had collected, and his crest slowly rose as he studied the numbers. What am I looking at, Therese? The mass readings for the human ship. Sir, they keep changing. One moment it reads as a small vessel, perhaps a frigate or a scout ship, and the next moment the reading spikes to something much larger before returning to the smaller figure. Veleth frowned and tapped the console, running a diagnostic on the sensors. Equipment malfunction, perhaps, or some kind of interference from the nebula. I considered that, sir, but our sensors are functioning perfectly, and the nebula should not cause this type of fluctuation. It is almost as if the ship itself is somehow masking its true size. The commander stared at the fluctuating numbers for a long moment, and a cold feeling began to grow in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in many years of service. Keep monitoring, he told Therese quietly, and inform me immediately if anything else unusual appears. But do not mention this to the Admiral unless the readings become consistent. Yes, Commander. As the battle group assembled and prepared to jump to the coordinates of the human vessel, Veleth stood at his station and watched the preparations with growing doubt. For he had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. But he said nothing, because High Admiral Catthorne did not tolerate doubt or hesitation, and because the Volanthi had never lost a battle, and because surely these primitive humans could not pose any real threat to the mightiest fleet in the known galaxy. Surely not. The 15 cruisers of the battle group finished their assembly and prepared for the hyperspace jump that would take them to the Ember Nebula. And High Admiral Catthorne watched from his command chair with a predator's smile on his scaled face. Today we remind the galaxy why we are feared, he announced to his bridge crew. Today we show these humans what happens when insects challenge giants. The fleet jumped, and the stars stretched into lines of light. And the Volanthi warships hurtled through hyperspace toward a confrontation that would change everything they believed about the universe, and their place in it. And in the darkness near the Ember Nebula, invisible against the swirling colors of cosmic gas and ancient starlight, a single vessel waited in perfect silence, patient and deadly, ready to teach the Volanthi a lesson they would never forget. The Volanthi battle group emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, 15 cruisers spreading out in an attack pattern that had been perfected over centuries of warfare. And High Admiral Catthorne felt a surge of pride as he watched his fleet move like a single deadly organism. Report, he commanded, and his voice was calm and confident, the voice of a predator who knew he was about to claim easy prey. Sensors have located the human vessel, High Admiral, Karth announced from the tactical station. It is positioned approximately 40,000 kilometers ahead, holding stationary near the outer edge of the nebula. Catthorne leaned forward in his command chair, his eyes fixed on the main view screen as the display zoomed in on the target. and what he saw made him laugh with genuine amusement. The human ship was small, remarkably small, appearing to be nothing more than a frigate-class vessel with a simple angular design and minimal visible weaponry. And it looked like a child's toy compared to his mighty cruisers. "This is what the archivist wanted us to be cautious about," he said, gesturing at the screen with one clawed hand. "A single patrol ship crewed by primitives. How terrifying." His officers laughed with him, though Commander Veleth remained silent at his station, still watching the sensor readings that continued to fluctuate in ways that made no sense. "Hail them," Kethvoran ordered. "Let us give these humans their one chance to surrender before we reduce them to atoms." The communications officer worked at his console for a moment, and then looked up with a confused expression. "High Admiral, the human vessel is not responding to our hails. They are receiving our transmission, but choosing not to reply." "Arrogant," Kethvoran hissed, and his amusement began to shift toward anger. "Do they think their silence will intimidate us? Do they believe they can simply ignore the Volanti Dominion?" He stood from his chair and walked closer to the view screen, studying the small human ship with growing irritation. "Power up all weapons and prepare to fire. If they will not speak, they will burn." "High Admiral, wait," Veleth suddenly called out, and every head on the bridge turned toward him in surprise, for no one interrupted the Admiral during combat operations. Kethvoran's eyes narrowed dangerously as he turned to face his subordinate. "You have something to say, Commander?" Veleth swallowed hard, but stood his ground, knowing that what he was about to say could end his career or save his life. "The sensor readings are still fluctuating, Admiral. And Navigation Officer Thuris has been tracking the anomaly since we first detected the human vessel. And she believes the ship may be masking its true size." "Masking its size," Kethvoran repeated, and his voice dripped with contempt. "You expect me to delay our attack because of a sensor glitch? It is not a glitch, Admiral. Our equipment is functioning perfectly, and the readings suggest that what we are seeing may not be the actual ship at all." Before Kethvoran could respond, the communications officer suddenly straightened at his station with wide eyes. "Hi, Admiral. We are receiving a transmission from the human vessel." "Finally, they decide to speak," Kethvoran said, dismissing Veleth with a wave of his hand. "Put it on the main channel." The bridge fell silent as a human voice filled the air, speaking in perfectly translated Galactic Standard, calm and measured and completely without fear. "Attention, unidentified fleet. You have entered the protection radius of colony vessel Esperanza. 17,000 human civilians, 400 children. You have 60 seconds to power down weapons and withdraw. This is your only warning." Kethvoran stared at the speaker in disbelief, and then he burst into laughter that was sharp and cruel. "A colony ship," he said, turning to look at his officers with gleeful contempt. "They are protecting a colony ship full of civilians, and they think this tiny frigate can stop us. These humans are even more foolish than I imagined." He pointed at the screen and raised his voice so the entire bridge could hear. "All ships, fire at will. Destroy that pathetic little vessel, and then we will deal with their precious colonists." "Admiral, please." Veleth tried one more time, desperation clear in his voice. "Something is wrong here. Why would they send a single small ship to protect thousands of civilians? It makes no tactical sense." "It makes no sense because they are primitives who do not understand war," Kethvoran snapped. "Now be silent or I'll have you removed from this bridge." The weapons officer announced that all ships were locked on target and ready to fire, and Kethvoran smiled as he prepared to give the command that would end this embarrassing encounter. But then Thuris screamed, "Admiral, the readings, something is happening to the human ship." On the view screen, the small frigate began to shimmer and distort, its edges blurring like heat waves rising from hot metal. And the entire bridge crew watched in stunned silence as the ship seemed to grow larger and larger. "What is this?" Kethvorin demanded. But his voice had lost its confidence, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. The shimmer intensified, and then with a flash of light that made everyone squint, the illusion fell away, and what emerged from behind the holographic cloak made every Volanthe on the bridge gasp in horror. It was not a frigate. The ship that now hung in space before them was a monster. A massive dreadnought that stretched for 3 kilometers from bow to stern. Its angular black hull covered in weapon batteries and sensor arrays and armor plating that made their cruisers look like insects beside a predator. "By the ancient stars," Theleth whispered, his voice barely audible. It was hiding. It was hiding its true form the entire time. The ship's designation appeared on their sensors now, clear and unmistakable. UEN Prometheus Titan-class Dreadnought, United Earth Navy. Kethvorin stood frozen, his scales pale and his eyes wide, unable to process what he was seeing, unable to understand how he had been so completely deceived. "That ship?" Karth said from the tactical station, his voice shaking. "Admiral, that ship has more firepower than our entire battle group combined. The weapons I am detecting should not even be possible, according to known galactic technology." The communication system crackled again, and the same calm human voice returned, but now there was an edge to it, cold and sharp like a blade being drawn. "Your 60 seconds have expired. You were warned. You chose to ignore that warning, and now you will learn what happens when you threaten human children. All ships, evasive maneuvers," Kethvorin finally screamed, his command voice breaking with panic. "Retreat to hyperspace immediately. All ships retreat." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was too late. The Prometheus was already moving, its massive engines flaring with power that should have been impossible for a ship its size. And its weapon systems were coming online with a sound that their sensors translated as a low, thunderous hum. Commander Veleth watched the tactical display and saw death approaching, saw the targeting systems of the human dreadnought locking onto each of their cruisers with mechanical precision. "We should have listened," he said quietly to no one in particular. "We should have listened to the warnings." High Admiral Kethvorin, who had never lost a battle in 40 years of service, who had never known fear or doubt or hesitation, felt his legs go weak as the human ship began to turn its weapons toward his fleet. And in that moment, as the first targeting lasers painted his hull, he finally understood that everything he believed about humans, everything he believed about his own superiority, had been catastrophically wrong. The silence before thunder lasted only a heartbeat longer, and then the Prometheus opened fire. The first shot from the Prometheus was not a warning. It was a statement of absolute and terrifying intent. A kinetic round the size of a ground transport vehicle screamed across the void at a speed that should have been impossible, and it struck the lead Volanthe cruiser directly in the center of its hull. The ship did not explode gradually or break apart in pieces. It simply ceased to exist, torn apart so completely that nothing remained but expanding clouds of superheated gas and fragments of metal too small to identify. "Ancestors protect us," Korath whispered as he watched the tactical display light up with weapons fire that his instruments could barely track. The Prometheus was not simply attacking, it was hunting, moving through the Volanthe formation with the speed and precision of a predator that had already calculated exactly how this battle would end. "Return fire," High Admiral Kethvorin screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "All ships concentrate fire on that monster." The remaining 14 cruisers opened up with everything they had: plasma cannons and missile batteries and energy, weapons that had shattered civilizations and brought entire species to their knees. The barrage was impressive. Hundreds of weapons firing simultaneously, filling the space between the fleets with deadly light and explosive fury. And the Prometheus simply ignored it. The shots that connected with the human dreadnought splashed against its armor like water against stone, leaving scorch marks and minor damage that seemed to heal itself as they watched. "All weapons are not penetrating," the weapons officer reported, his voice high and thin with terror. "Admiral, we are hitting them, but we are not hurting them." Voran could not respond, could not speak, could only watch as the nightmare continued to unfold. The Prometheus rotated slightly, bringing a new section of its hull to face the Volanti fleet. And Commander Veleth saw weapons batteries the size of buildings tracking toward their ships with cold mechanical precision. "All ships scatter," Veleth shouted, taking command because the Admiral seemed frozen in shock. "Do not maintain formation, scatter, and run for hyperspace." But the human ship was faster than anything that large had a right to be. Energy beams of blinding white light lanced out from the Prometheus, and Veleth watched in horror as the beams sliced through two more cruisers with contemptuous ease, cutting them in half like a hot blade through soft flesh. The ships came apart in silence, their atmospheres venting into space in clouds of frozen vapor, their crews dying before they could even understand what had happened. "Hyperspace engines are charging," Therese shouted from her station. 40 seconds until we can jump." "We do not have 40 seconds, Veleth realized as he watched the Prometheus continue its devastating assault. A spread of missiles launched from the human ship, but these were not ordinary missiles. They moved with intelligence and purpose, changing course to track their targets as if they were alive. 3 more cruisers vanished in balls of flame as the missiles found them, and Veleth saw on his display that the point defense systems of those ships had tried to shoot down the incoming weapons. They had failed. They had not even come close. "Admiral, we need to surrender," Veleth shouted, grabbing Voran by the shoulder and shaking him. "Admiral, can you hear me? We must surrender now before they destroy us all." Voran turned to look at him with eyes that seemed empty, all his pride and arrogance stripped away by the horror of what was happening. "Surrender," he repeated, the words sounding foreign and strange coming from his mouth. Yes, transmit our surrender." The communications officer practically dove at his console, his claws shaking as he activated the emergency surrender channel that the Volanti had never used in 4,000 years of warfare. "Attention, human vessel. This is the Volanti battle group. We surrender. We surrender unconditionally. Please stop firing." But the Prometheus did not stop. Another cruiser exploded as a kinetic round tore through its engine section, and then another as energy weapons carved through its shields like they did not exist. "They are not accepting our surrender," the communications officer cried out. "They are not stopping." Veleth felt cold despair settle into his chest as he realized that the humans might simply choose to kill them all. That mercy might not be something these people offered to those who threatened their children. The battle had lasted perhaps 30 seconds, and already 11 of their 15 cruisers had been reduced to debris and bodies and scattered wreckage. "Hyperspace engines ready," Therese shouted. "All remaining ships can jump." "Do it," Veleth commanded. "All ships jump now." 4 cruisers, including the Conqueror's Pride, engaged their hyperspace engines and tore holes in reality itself, desperate to escape the nightmare they had awakened. As the stars stretched into lines and the ship hurtled into the safety of hyperspace, Veleth caught one last glimpse of the battlefield on the tactical display. The Prometheus sat motionless among the wreckage of the Volanti fleet, surrounded by the burning hulks of 11 cruisers and the bodies of thousands of crew members who had died in less than a minute. And then they were gone, fleeing through hyperspace with the survivors of a massacre that should have been impossible. On the bridge of the Conqueror's Pride, silence reigned for what felt like an eternity. High Admiral Voran sat in his command chair and stared at nothing, his scales pale and his body shaking, all trace of his former arrogance completely destroyed. Veleth moved through the bridge, checking on officers and trying to restore some sense of order, but everyone seemed to be in shock. "Commander," Therese said quietly, her voice barely a whisper, I have been reviewing the sensor data from the battle. What did you find? Velith asked, though part of him did not want to know. The Prometheus, Thuris said, and her voice trembled as she spoke. During the entire engagement, it only used 12% of its weapon systems. 12%, Commander. Velith felt the blood drain from his face as the implications of that number struck him. You are certain of this? I have checked the data 3 times. That ship was not fighting us at full capacity. It was barely trying, Commander, and it still destroyed 11 cruisers in 60 seconds. Velith leaned against the console for support, his legs suddenly weak. The humans had been holding back. They had been restraining themselves, and they had still massacred the Volanthi fleet with contemptuous ease. What have we done? He whispered. What kind of enemy have we made? The communication system suddenly crackled, and a familiar human voice filled the bridge, calm and measured despite the violence that had just occurred. Volanthi fleet, your surrender is accepted. You are permitted to return to your homeworld with the following message for your leaders. Humanity seeks no conflict with the Volanthi Dominion. We wish only to protect our people and live in peace. But if you ever threaten human civilians again, if you ever send warships against our families and our children, we will not show the restraint we demonstrated today. This is not a threat. This is a promise. Prometheus out. The transmission ended, and the bridge remained silent. Commander Velith looked at the broken admiral, at the traumatized crew, at the evidence of their catastrophic defeat displayed on every screen. We need to get home, he said finally. The Dominion needs to know what happened here. They need to understand what kind of species we have provoked. As the 4 surviving cruisers limped through hyperspace toward home, carrying the terrible news of their destruction, Velith could not stop thinking about what Thuris had told him. 12%. The humans had crushed them using only 12% of their firepower, and they had called it restraint. What would happen if they ever decided not to hold back? Velith shuddered at the thought and prayed to the ancient stars that his people would be wise enough to never find out. The Hall of Dominion on Kathos Prime had stood for 6,000 years, its towering pillars and ancient murals bearing witness to every great decision in Volanthi history. But in all those millennia, the hall had never seen a gathering quite like this one. The Supreme Council sat in their traditional semicircle, 12 of the most powerful Volanthi in the Dominion, their scales ranging from deep purple to brilliant gold, their faces showing varying degrees of shock and fury. Before them stood the 4 captains who had survived the massacre at the Ember Nebula, their heads bowed and their spirits broken. Commander Velith had taken command of the Conqueror's Pride after High Admiral Kethvorin had been relieved of duty due to his complete mental collapse. And now he stood at the center of the hall and delivered his report to leaders who did not want to believe what they were hearing. 60 seconds, Supreme Councilor Vethrin repeated, his voice echoing off the ancient walls. You expect us to believe that a single human ship destroyed 11 of our cruisers in 60 seconds? I do not expect you to believe it, Counselor, Velith replied, keeping his voice steady despite his exhaustion. I expect you to watch the sensor recordings we have provided. The evidence is undeniable. This evidence could have been fabricated, another counselor snapped. This could be a coward's excuse for incompetence and failure. 20,000 Volanthi warriors are dead, Velith said, and now there was anger in his voice. 11 warships have been reduced to debris. High Admiral Kethvorin, the greatest naval commander of our generation, has been reduced to a babbling shell who cannot even speak his own name, and you think this is a fabrication? The hall fell silent at his words, and the counselors exchanged uneasy glances. What do you recommend, Commander? Counselor Vethrin asked, his tone more measured now. I recommend extreme caution, Velith said. These humans are not what we believe them to be. They are not primitives stumbling into the stars. They are something else entirely. Something dangerous beyond anything we have encountered. Dangerous, a younger counselor scoffed. They are one species with perhaps a handful of star systems. We have conquered 12 systems and command a fleet of 2,000 warships. What could they possibly do against our full might? They could do to our fleet what they did to mine, Gullith replied coldly. They could do it faster and more completely, and then they could come for our homeworld. Enough of this fear-mongering, Counselor Vethrin said, raising a hand to silence the growing murmurs. We did not build the greatest empire in this sector by cowering from every threat. We will assemble a proper fleet and teach these humans that their victory was a fluke. If I may speak, Supreme Counselor. The voice was old and thin, coming from the shadows at the edge of the hole, and everyone turned to see who had interrupted the most powerful Volanthi in the Dominion. Grand Archivist Sethania emerged from the darkness. Her scales faded to gray with age and her eyes milky, but somehow still sharp. She had served the Dominion for over 200 years, cataloging knowledge and preserving history, and she was one of the few beings who could address the Council without first being recognized. Archivist, Vethrin said, his tone shifting to something approaching respect. You have information relevant to this matter. I have warnings, Supreme Counselor. Warnings that should have been heeded before our fleet was sent to die. She moved slowly to the center of the hall, carrying a data tablet in her aged hands. I have spent decades studying the fragments of information available about humanity, piecing together what little exists in the Galactic Registry and what can be inferred from the strange silences in their official records. Silences, Vethrin repeated. What do you mean? I mean that humanity has deliberately hidden their true capabilities from the galaxy, Sethania replied. I mean that the primitive species our intelligence services describe does not exist. It is a mask, a deception designed to make others underestimate them. She activated her tablet and projected an image into the air above the council chamber, showing a small blue and green planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. This is Earth, the human homeworld, and it is what scientists call a death world. A death world, one of the counselors asked with obvious skepticism. A planet so hostile that most species would consider it uninhabitable, Sethania explained. Earth has extreme temperature variations, violent weather systems, frequent seismic activity, and an ecosystem filled with predators and parasites and diseases that would kill most galactic species within days. She changed the image to show various Earth creatures, massive reptiles with enormous teeth, sleek aquatic predators, venomous insects, microscopic organisms that could destroy a body from within. Humans evolved on this nightmare world. They did not simply survive, they conquered it. They became the apex predators of a planet that actively tried to kill them at every turn. The counselors shifted uncomfortably as they studied the images. And their history is even more revealing, Sethania continued. Humans spent most of their existence at war, not with other species, but with themselves. They fought each other constantly for thousands of years, developing weapons and tactics and strategies that make our own warfare look primitive. They fought each other, Vethrin asked, confusion clear on his face. Why would a species wage war against itself? Because they are pack hunters by nature, fiercely protective of their groups and suspicious of outsiders. They formed tribes and nations and factions that competed for resources and territory. And in that competition, they became the most skilled warriors their galaxy has ever produced. She projected a new image, showing the devastation of human weapons, cities reduced to rubble, landscapes scarred by explosions, the aftermath of conflicts that had claimed millions of lives. 200 years before they achieved interstellar travel, humans developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, and they came very close to using them, that they pulled back from the brink. They looked into the abyss of extinction and chose to survive. And this is supposed to make us less afraid of them, Counselor Vethrin demanded. It should make you understand them, Sefania replied. Humans do not build weapons because they want to conquer. They build weapons because they have learned that the universe is hostile and they refuse to be victims ever again. They are driven by a single overwhelming instinct, which is protection, the archivist said simply. Protection of their families, their children, their species. There is nothing a human will not do to protect those they love. No limit to the violence they will unleash against anyone who threatens their young. She changed the image one final time, and the council chamber fell absolutely silent. The projection showed a massive shipyard in orbit around a gas giant, filled with vessels that dwarfed even the Prometheus. This is one of 7 human military shipyards that I have been able to identify from scattered intelligence reports, Sefania said. The ship that destroyed our fleet, the Prometheus, is classified by humans as a patrol vessel. It is designed for routine border security and emergency response. She pointed to the largest ships in the image, enormous constructs that looked like floating cities. These are what humans call their war fleet, ships so powerful that our entire navy would not survive a single engagement against even one of them. The silence stretched on as the counselors stared at the image. Why have they not conquered the galaxy? Counselor Vethron finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because they do not want to, Sefania replied. Humans have no desire for empire, no hunger for territory beyond what they need to support their population. They want only to live in peace and raise their children in safety. She turned to face the council directly, her ancient eyes somehow burning with intensity. But when their children are threatened, when their families are endangered, they become something else entirely. They become the apex predators of a death world, and they will burn the galaxy to ashes before they allow harm to come to those they love. She pointed at the surviving captains. Our fleet threatened 17,000 human civilians, including 400 children, and a single patrol ship killed 11 cruisers in 60 seconds while holding back most of its firepower. Imagine what they would do if they believed we were a genuine threat. Counselor Vethron looked at the image of the human shipyard, at the massive warships waiting in the darkness of space, and for the first time in his long political career, he felt true fear. What do you recommend, Archivist? I recommend we do exactly what the humans demanded, Sefania replied. We make peace. We apologize for our aggression, and we never give them a reason to see us as enemies. And if we do not? The old archivist smiled, and there was no warmth in it. Then we will discover firsthand what happens when humanity decides a species is too dangerous to be allowed to exist. And I promise you, Supreme Counselor, we will not survive that lesson. 6 months had passed since the massacre at the Ember Nebula, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Volanthi Dominion, once the most feared power in their sector of space, had requested formal peace negotiations with humanity, and their request had been accepted. The meeting would take place at a neutral diplomatic station called Haven Point, a massive structure that floated in the empty space between star systems and served as a meeting ground for species who did not trust each other enough to meet on home territory. A Volanthi delegation of 7 diplomats arrived first, led by Supreme Counselor Vethron himself, who had decided that only his personal presence could demonstrate the seriousness of the Dominion's desire for peace. Commander Veleth had been included in the delegation as a military advisor, and he stood near the back of the conference room, watching the empty chairs on the human side of the table. They are late, one of the younger diplomats muttered. Perhaps they think they can disrespect us even now. They will come, Veleth replied quietly. Humans may be many things, but they are not ones to break their word. The door on the far side of the room slid open, and the Volanthi delegation straightened to attention. But only one human entered the room. She was a female of medium height with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes the color of deep space. and she wore a simple uniform with a single rank insignia that identified her as a captain in the United Earth Navy. "Greetings," she said, her voice calm and measured as she walked to the human side of the table and sat down. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez, and I have been authorized to negotiate on behalf of the United Earth government." Counselor Vethrin blinked in surprise, for he had expected a full diplomatic team, perhaps even a high-ranking political leader. "Captain Vasquez," he said carefully, "we had expected a larger delegation. This is a matter of great importance to both our peoples." "I understand your confusion," Vasquez replied, "but humanity does not require a large team for simple negotiations. And despite the circumstances that brought us here, our terms are quite simple." She placed a data tablet on the table and slid it toward the Volanti side. "You will officially recognize human space and agree to respect our borders. You will provide full reparations to the families of the colonists aboard the Esperanza who were traumatized by your fleet's approach. The amount has already been calculated and included in that document." Vethrin picked up the tablet and studied the terms, his crest rising in surprise. "These terms are remarkably generous," he said, suspicion creeping into his voice. "You are not demanding territory or tribute or restrictions on our military." "We have no interest in your territory," Vasquez replied, "and we have no desire to weaken your military. A strong Volanti dominion that respects our boundaries is preferable to a weak one that breeds resentment." "Then, what do you want?" "There is one additional requirement," Vasquez said, and for the first time there was steel in her voice. "You will broadcast a message to every species in the Galactic Communications Network. The message will be simple. Humanity protects its own. This is not a threat. It is a promise." The Volanti diplomats exchanged glances, and one of them leaned forward with a frown. "You want us to advertise your strength to the galaxy, to become heralds of human power." "I want the galaxy to understand something important," Vasquez said. "I want every species who might consider threatening human civilians to know exactly what they will face. I want them to learn from your example so that they do not have to learn from their own." Counselor Vethrin studied the human female for a long moment, trying to read something in her expression. "Commander Veleth has told us about the battle," he said finally. "He told us that your ship used only a fraction of its weapons, that you were holding back even as you destroyed our fleet. Commander Veleth is an observant officer. Why did you hold back? You could have killed them all. You could have left no survivors to carry word of what happened." Captain Vasquez leaned back in her chair and met the counselor's eyes directly. "Because we wanted survivors," she said simply. "We wanted the story to spread. We wanted the Dominion to understand exactly what had happened and why. And we wanted to give you the chance to make the right choice. And if we had chosen to retaliate instead of seeking peace, then we would have been prepared for that as well." The words hung in the air, and every Volanti in the room understood exactly what she meant. Counselor Vethrin picked up a stylus and signed the agreement without further negotiation. "We accept your terms," he said. "The message will be broadcast within the hour." "Then we have an agreement," Vasquez said, standing and extending her hand in what Veleth recognized as a human gesture of goodwill. Vethrin hesitated for a moment, then reached out and clasped her hand in his own. As the formal ceremony concluded and the delegations prepared to depart, Veleth found himself standing near Captain Vasquez. "May I ask you a question, Captain?" "Of course, Commander." "Why do you hide your strength?" he asked. "You have the power to dominate this region of space, perhaps even the entire galaxy, yet you conceal your true capabilities behind illusions and misdirection. Why?" Vasquez smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Veleth's scales prickle with unease. "Tell me, Commander, what would happen if humanity announced ourselves as a major galactic power, if we revealed our full military capabilities and declared ourselves openly?" Veleth considered the question carefully. Other species would be intimidated. They would fear you. Some might form alliances against you. Others might try to curry your favor. Exactly, Vasquez said. And in trying to contain us or appease us, they would reveal themselves as either enemies or sycophants, neither of which is useful for understanding who they truly are. She began walking toward the door, and Veleth fell into step beside her. By appearing weak, we give others the opportunity to show us their true nature. The Volanti saw a small ship and immediately chose aggression. You assumed we were primitives and decided to teach us a lesson. That choice told us everything we needed to know about your government and your military. You were testing us, Veleth realized, horror dawning in his voice. We were gathering information, Vasquez corrected. And now we know that the Volanti are aggressive but rational, that you can be taught and that you are capable of recognizing when you are outmatched. That information is valuable. She stopped at the door and turned to face him directly. Other species have not been so wise, Commander. Other species have seen our apparent weakness and decided to strike, and they are no longer a concern. The implication of those words settled in the Valia's mind like ice water. How many? He asked quietly. Enough that the galaxy has become a safer place for human children, Vasquez replied, and that is all that matters to us. She extended her hand again, and Veleth shook it, his claws trembling slightly. Commander, I hope we never meet again under hostile circumstances. I believe your people have learned from this experience, and I believe you personally will work to ensure that lesson is not forgotten. You have my word, Captain. Good, she said. And then she smiled again, warmer this time. Then perhaps in the future, we can meet as friends rather than former enemies. Humanity does not hold grudges against those who learn from their mistakes. She walked through the door and disappeared down the corridor, leaving Veleth alone with his thoughts. As he made his way back to the Volanti shuttle, he passed a viewport that looked out into the darkness of space. Somewhere out there, invisible and silent, human warships were patrolling the void, watching for threats, waiting for someone to make the wrong choice. And Veleth finally understood why humanity had survived a death world, why they had fought each other for millennia without destroying themselves, why they had built weapons capable of shattering planets and then chosen not to use them. They were patient. They were patient and clever and absolutely ruthless in defense of their own. And they had turned their apparent weakness into a weapon more powerful than any missile or energy beam. They let their enemies reveal themselves, and then they responded with overwhelming force. As the shuttle lifted off from Haven Point and began the journey home, Veleth thought about all the species across the galaxy who had heard rumors of the primitive humans, who had seen what appeared to be weakness and had begun making plans. He thought about the message that would soon be broadcast to every corner of known space. And he wondered how many of those species would be wise enough to listen, and how many would pay the price that the Volanti had nearly paid. In the darkness between stars, the human warships continued their eternal vigil, cloaked and patient, watching and waiting. And somewhere among them, the Prometheus moved silently through the void, ready to remind anyone who had forgotten that humanity protected its own, and that the cost of ignorance would always be paid in stardust and blood.